Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, this is nice. We haven't had this nice acoustic since the last time we were here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's meeting of the Committee of Adjustments. This meeting is to consider applications for minor variance under the and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act of Ontario. Please keep in mind the intent of this process is to review the proposal that is before us, listen to the evidence, and then make a decision. This process is not intended to be used to resolve any concerns or disputes that may exist between the town, individuals, or organizations. If a request for a deferral is made and the committee grants such a request, the committee, after consultation with the Secretary-Treasurer, will set a new hearing date. No further notice will be provided unless there are changes to the application. In order to conduct an effective and efficient hearing, we have adopted the following process. The owner or authorized agent will be given the opportunity, if so desired, to briefly explain to us the basis of the application, answer any questions that may arise out of the hearing. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for this presentation. You need to state your full name and address for the record. Any materials submitted to the committee for viewing will remain the property of this committee. Any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. All persons attending the hearing who wish to support or oppose the application must also state their name and address for the record. A 5-minute presentation will be provided to make your presentation. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chairperson of the committee. Any submissions beyond those 5 minutes will also be at the discretion of the committee. If there are several speakers sharing the same point of view, please select a spokesperson to present the group's opinion. We do want to hear the views of everyone present. However, covering the same points will not advance your case. The owner or agent will then be provided a further 5 minutes to respond to the comments made by any interested parties and answer any questions from the committee members. If the owner or agent has any concerns found in staff reports, particularly with any proposed conditions, this will be the opportunity for you to advise us. The matter will then be taken into committee for a decision, and this will mark the end of all discussion. Once the committee makes an oral decision, any person desiring a copy must file with the Secretary-Treasurer at this meeting a written request for the notice of the decision. A green sheet is provided for this purpose in the back of the room. Please note that you must make a written request in order to be included on this list that is used by the local planning appeal tribunal for the giving of any subsequent notice of any appeal. Written notice of the committee's decision will be mailed no later than 10 days for minor variances and 15 days for consent applications to the applicant, owner, and agent, and any other person who has filled a written request for such notice. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, you may appeal this to the local planning appeal tribunal. The last date to appeal the decision to the local planning appeal tribunal will be noted on the decision. If no appeal is received within the prescribed time frame, the decision of the committee becomes final and binding, and the Secretary-Treasurer will then notify the applicant through written correspondence. People attending this committee meeting are to be courteous and respectful to the members of the committee, town staff, and other people in attendance tonight. Tonight's meeting will be video recorded and available for future viewing on the town's YouTube channel. We ask that the cellular phones be switched off or at least maintained on silent mode during the meeting, as they do tend to interfere with our audio system. Thank you. So we have one regret, Mr. Michael Talowski, declaration of pecuniary interests. Okay, I have one myself, and that's for application CAV 132 of 2018 at 1177 Invicta Drive. At that point in time, I'll ask Mr. Hardcastle to take over the chair. Thank you. Request for deferral or withdrawal of applications. Is there anyone here who would like to withdraw an application or defer? Come on, forward, please. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Arlene Beaumont. I'm with Outred and Associates. I'm appearing this evening for Bill Outred. We are the agents for St. Peter and St. Paul Coptic Orthodox Church of Oakville. And we're requesting deferral this evening.
Very well. I'll let Mr. Talowski handle that. I'll just step out for a moment and just get me when you're done.
Thank you. What is the basis of the deferral request?
So the church is looking to do an addition to their premises, and they don't have sufficient parking once the addition is constructed. So we were looking for a parking variance. However, planning has asked that we defer this application until we've had an initial site plan pre-application with planning staff. So I'm thinking a deferral sometime into the new year probably, because we need to arrange a pre-app with the planning people.
Okay. I'm just going to canvass to find out if there's any members of the public who are here with respect to this matter. Anybody here with respect to CAV A 132 of 2018? I don't see any residents here, so I understand that notice will be sent out again with respect to this matter. So I'll take this this motion to the committee with respect to a decision on this matter. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Charlebois?
I couldn't see it. Mr. Chair, I'm just going to put forward a motion that this matter be deferred.
Okay. Thank you. Any discussion on that? Okay. On the motion? Your matter has been deferred. Please be in touch with the Secretary Treasurer with respect to the date after you've had an opportunity to meet with planning staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no one else who would like to defer a withdrawn application. I see none. Thank you. Okay, we have no consents. We will proceed with our first application of the night, and that is CAV 127 of 2018 for Sovereign Street and East Street.
How do I work this, Kate? Is it okay? Hi, good evening,
Good
Madam.
evening.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Glenn Wellings. I'm the planning consultant for the proponent. And just a few brief remarks, Madam Chair. The requested variance is the result of an oversight in the implementing zoning bylaw for the proposed townhouse development, and in particular, the townhouse block facing Sovereign Street. I do want to assure the committee members that the development application or development proposal has not changed from the development that was approved by Town Council back in December of 2017. And we actually needed Council's permission to file this application, as it was within the 2-year window from when the zoning bylaw was approved. And thank you to Council O'Meara for helping us stick handle that. But just in working through the site plan application, Madam Chair and committee members, we discovered that we had upwards of 73% encroachment of the building wall facing Sovereign Street within the front yard setback. The front yard setback is 4.5 meters. The encroachment is 73%, 1.5 meters into that setback, up to 3 meters. So the bylaw actually is quite confusing. Probably didn't need to be that confusing. If the setback was set at 3 meters, we would not need this variance. But anyway, life isn't that easy when it comes to zoning. So Madam Chair and committee members, it's my opinion that the application does meet the 4 tests. It was an oversight. It is the same development that was approved by Council back in December 2017. And with respect to the staff comments, I do appreciate the insight of the staff comments. And I think Kate referred to the bylaw shrink wrapping the development. That's definitely the case here. And the oversight was something that was simply missed. So, Madam Chair, we're here to correct an oversight, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Wellings. Are there any questions of Mr. Wellings at this time? I see none. Are there any members in the attendance that are here for CAV 127 of 2018 for Sovereign Street and East Street? Okay, I see none. Since there are no members in the audience, are we ready for a motion? Okay, thank you, Mr. Charlebois.
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as his presentation here this evening, and particularly the town's written staff report, which, as the applicant did mention, was quite detailed and certainly took me through the whole history here. Also taking into account that there's nobody here from the public in opposition or support, nor have we received any written submissions in opposition or support. I find that this particular variance is presented. I do find that it does meet the 4 tests in the Planning Act. I'm going to put forward a recommendation that it be approved, subject to 2 conditions. The first condition, that the proposal be constructed in general accordance with the site plan and elevations as submitted. And the second condition, subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from this date of this decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
If you would mind a friendly amendment, there is a condition from staff that the general, yes, proposed development be constructed in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services.
Oh, then I will retract. I did not see that. So the first condition then gets amended where I initially stated construct in general accordance with the site plan and elevations as submitted. And in its place substituted that the proposed development be constructed in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Charlebois. Mr. Wellings, you're familiar with these conditions? You're in agreement with them?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay. Your application has been approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Application CAV 128 of 2018 at 2441 Lakeshore Road West. That's the Bronte Village Mall redevelopment. Hi.
Hi, good
I'm
evening.
looking-
Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Good evening, Madam Chair and other committee members. My name is Taylor Gascoigne. I am the agent for the proponent of the Bronte Village Mall redevelopment. I am from MHBC Planning, located at 7050 Weston Road in Woodbridge in Suite 230. And I'm here today to request approval for minor variances pertaining to the redevelopment of the west portion of the mall.
Ms. Gascoigne, am I pronouncing it right?
Gascoigne.
Gascoigne, okay, thank you.
No problem. So these variances have evolved through the site plan design process and ongoing consultation back and forth with the town staff. And these evolved through working through key development, working through the development of the elevations of the building and overall functionality of the building, and that's how these variances have originated. I know in past we've been back and forth to committee, and so this is the final time that we are coming to committee to finally work out some of the smaller details that were not contemplated in the previous zoning bylaw amendment that is specific to the site. We believe that the overall minor variances are maintaining the general intent and purpose of the 4 tests. That is that they are still permitted uses under the official plan as well as the zoning, and they maintain the general intent and purpose of both of these functions. We believe their minor nature is they're meant to serve the functional servicing of the building as well as to work with some of the design aesthetics that overall help to improve separation distance between adjacent residential uses and overall reduce any concerns of privacy and overlook. And lastly, they're desirable as the proposal provides a mixture of uses that is a complement to existing commercial uses as well as the residential uses to the north. In particular, this is purpose-built luxury rental housing that we are trying to put forward that is very desirable in this neighborhood.
Thank you, Ms. Gascoigne. Are there any questions at this time? Okay. I did forget to canvass for members in the public. Is there anyone here for CAV 128, 2018 at 2441 Lakeshore Road West? Okay, I see none. In that case, your presentation, you're satisfied, you've shared everything. If there's no questions from the committee members, we're ready to proceed into a motion. Okay, Mr. Flemington, thank you.
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written staff report, which I noted that staff is in support of as it has been resubmitted, and also having taken into account the comments presented by the applicant this evening, I'm prepared to make a motion in support of all of the variances being approved. I do submit the following conditions: that the proposed development be constructed in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning Services, and that it be subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Flemington. Is there a discussion on these recommendations? I see none. All those in support? Okay. The application has been approved. Thank you, Ms. Gascoigne.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Okay, CAV 129 of 2018 for Lambert Court. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Gren Weiss from Gren Weiss Architect and Associates.
Glenn Weiss.
So I'm here to answer any questions the committee or anybody from the audience might have.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Just give me a moment to canvass the audience. Who is here for application CAV 129 of 2018 at 4 Lambert Court? Okay, I see none. We do have some letters of support that have come in. So this is your time. If you're satisfied with the report, we've read our reports. We've
Yes, we're
done our
very
site visit.
satisfied.
Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Weiss at this moment? There aren't. Are we ready to take this matter into committee? Yes, there's nobody here. Mr. Hardcastle? Yes, okay. We will take this matter into committee if you have nothing to add. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having reviewed the materials undertaken my site visit and reviewed the staff report, I am satisfied that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Act. I'll put forward a motion of approval, noting that the building is consistent with the relationship of other buildings within the area. I would note that there were 6 letters of support for the application. And I will make my motion subject to 2 conditions. The first being that the proposed dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the final approved site plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning. And the second being that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there any discussion on this recommendation? I see none. Okay, all those in support? Okay, your application has been approved, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Application CAV 093 of 2018, deferred from June 26th at 1077 Scott Avenue. Hi. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Dylan Dewsbury from Design Plan Services, and I'm here representing the owners of 1077 Scott.
Okay. Give me a moment, Mr. Dewsbury. Is there anyone here for application CAV 093 of 2018 at 1077 Scott Avenue? Okay, I see none, thank you. You're familiar with our procedures. If you have nothing further to add, we're happy to take this into committee. This is your time to share whatever comments you might have.
I'm happy for you, the committee, to take it under consideration. I just wanted to add that we did have 5 letters from neighbours that were submitted with the original application in June. I just noted they weren't included in the staff report this time around, but seeing as the variances have only decreased, their support remains.
Okay, very well. So we will note that those letters of support should carry. Are there any questions of Mr. Dewsbury at this moment? I see none. You're familiar with the conditions that staff have recommended?
Yes.
Okay, and you're satisfied with them? So we'll take this matter into committee if you have nothing further to add.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Charlebois, thank you.
Madam Chair, again, having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, which in this particular case, they are in support of the application. I also want to note here that I commend the applicant for working with the town with respect to their last submission. I do note that at the applicant's request, he wants to note that there were 5 letters of support to his first application back in June 26, 2018. I do note that the variances are slightly different, but they're actually less than what they were before, so I kind of agree with you that these letters of support should stand. Therefore, taking into account that there are no objections, either written or verbal from the public, I'm going to make a motion that these new variances as submitted be approved, subject to, and this is where I got to check because subject to the condition of the proposed dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the site plan and elevations as submitted, and subject again to another further condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of this decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed.
Thank you, Mr. Charlebois. Is there any discussions on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, your application has been approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can decide. Okay. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. It's just a clerical issue. Okay, moving on to CAV 130 of 2018 at 1153 Westdale Road. Good evening.
Good evening, committee. My name is Curtis Van Kulen from Hughes Design Studio. I'm here to answer any questions the committee may have about this application.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name.
It's Van Kulen?
Van Kulen.
Yes.
Okay. The acoustics here ring, and I'm not always getting the exact pronunciation, so I apologize. Who is here for application CAV 130 of 2018 at 1153 Westdale Road? Okay, I see none. This is for the proposed cabana in the rear of the property. Are there any questions of Mr. Van Kulen at this time? If you have nothing further to add, we're happy to take this matter into committee. Okay, I'm ready for a motion. Mr. Flemington, thank you.
Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written staff report, noting that they are in support of, also having taken into account the comments, noting that there was no written objections from the public, I am prepared to make a motion in support of the variances as submitted with the following conditions. Subject that the proposed cabana be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated August 30th, 2018, and subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed.
Thank you, Mr. Flemington. Is there a discussion on these recommendations? I see none. All those in support? Okay, your application has been approved. Thank you. Okay. CAV 131 of 2018 for 2488 Lakeshore Road East. Good evening.
Good evening. Jason Heater from Hicks Design Studio, 295 Robinson Street, Oakville.
Thank you, Mr. Heater. If you give me a moment to canvass the room. Who is here for CAV 131 of 2018 for 2488 Lakeshore Road? Yes, sir, thank you. Are you here in opposition or in support? Opposition, thank you. Mr. Heater, I'd like you to take us through your presentation, and then we'll give the gentleman in the back a chance to address the committee.
Certainly. So we're here seeking 3 variances, 2 of which are quite minor in nature, and all 3 really are rather technical in nature. The first of which is the building coverage increase from 30% to 33.94. There is a building permit currently that has currently been issued for this. The house is under construction. It is permitted with 3 as-of-right balconies on the rear of the building as constructed as wood arbor features with a fully trimmed belt line. I'll just put this up here. So they would be located at the back edge of the property. The client is seeking to not alter the look and feel of those, just simply cover the top of them with plywood and rubber membrane to use them as a flat roof covered porch feature. This element out here will remain as an arbor structure. The 2 porches that we're seeking to cover are located within the body and the internal mass of the building. It does not extend out past the rear. And it really has little impact on neighboring properties. And again, in its current constructed configuration, they can exist as they are built as arbor structures. The second variance, there were 2 minor alterations made during framing to correct some structural issues that increased the GFA by 0.34 square feet. Again, they did not alter the look and feel of the elevation or the house whatsoever. They just, it was to align some walls for construction purposes. And the third variance, there is a walkout, lower walkout terrace right in this area here. We're looking to, rather than run the steps on a diagonal to the house, they're looking to run the steps along the existing concrete shoring wall. That's really what this variance is all about. In its currently approved state, it runs straight like that, but it created this sort of awkward triangle up here. So we're just simply looking to align those stairs along the existing shoring wall. I'm not sure if it did make it into the file, but there were 7 letters of approval from the neighboring residents.
Yes, we do have those on file.
Okay.
there any questions of Mr. Heater at this time? You have staff?
Sorry,
I'm confused.
did I jump the gun?
Oh, you were, okay. I want to use her meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to facilitate, to avoid any confusion for the interested parties that are here this evening, I would just want the applicant to have the opportunity to clarify. There are no balconies as part of this proposal. They are not permitted in the zero Suffolk zone. The original proposals were for arbor structures, which would not have been accessible from the second floor. The covered porches still would not be accessible from the second floor. I believe there was maybe just a misspoke. There are no balconies with respect to this proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn. So, Mr. Charlebois, you had a question?
Well, that was the first part of my question.
Okay.
The second part is, I just wanted to confirm, because I couldn't see for myself, but are these already constructed?
They are currently, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions? I see none. Mr. Heater, if you have, oh no, we do have a member in the audience who's here for objection. Sir, would you like to address the committee?
Sorry. Here it is.
Good evening. Can I have your name and address for the record, please?
Yep, Sean Salisbury, 70 Arkendo Drive, Oakville.
Sean Salisbury.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only concern I understood from myself and some other residents was the property itself is quite large and quite tall given the size of the lot. As you can see, I didn't have this plan view before. You can see it's quite close to I would assume this is the property line. Quite close to the property line. I guess doesn't sound like much going from 30% to 34% coverage, but it is, 10% more on the house of a house that's already quite considerable proportion of the lot itself. And in my opinion, it doesn't, let's say, keep in sync with most of the properties in this neighborhood, which typically have quite a bit of space. There might be big houses, but have a lot of space around them. This property has already consumed the maximum, probably permitted space as well as permitted height of that property. So that's why I would say we're disappointed that the property is going to get another 10% larger.
Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Salisbury at this time? I see none. You would like to speak, sir? Okay. I'd like your name and address.
I'm also a neighbor.
Okay.
My name's Gordon Brown, and I'm from 62 Arkendo, next door to Sean.
Thank you.
I've got photographs. I'm not sure if the photographs will work on this, but they might.
You can show them, and then I will ask that you later on email them to the Secretary Treasurer so that we have them on record, unless you're willing to give up your phone.
That's the view of the house from number 70, what do we think, Sean? 74. Okay, so that's not right behind the house, but that's the backyard. That fence is the neighbor. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this house is totally, it's a whole different style than anything else we have in the neighborhood. It's actually, rather than 7 meters, it's 6.99 meters high. And that's how far it is from the property line on that side. But when they were digging the foundation for this house, They dug right up to the property line, so all that fence fell in. And the tree that is there, the taproot was cut. So that tree's dying and dead now. That's actually on the neighbor's property. Okay, so at some point it may fall on the new house that they've built. That's the view from the back door of the neighbor's property. Those are windows that are about 8 foot wide by 6 feet high, all across the back. And as you can see, there was some talk about a balcony. Okay, I think that's what they were talking. I know that we've corrected it, but I think that's why there's a roof over that structure. My understanding is what they've applied to do is fill in those covered porches. There's 2 of them. There's this one, there's one there, and there's one there. They've both got covered roofs, which I think is what they were referring to originally mistakenly as balconies. Those were supposed to be, I think they're saying pergolas. Those are not pergolas. Those look like structures. The place was always built like this. So I think you may tend to agree with us. This house really is out of character for the whole neighborhood, and it's jammed onto a very small lot. So I think I echo Sean's concern that they've gone 10% over, more than 10% over the allowable coverage on the lot size.
The house might be out of character from the design perspective because it's not similar to your designs, but we don't regulate the designs as much.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is because of the size and because they're asking for 10% more coverage on the lot size, I don't think it makes sense.
Okay, well, we appreciate your submissions.
Okay.
Are there any questions of Mr. Brown at this time? Would you like any items of clarification? Okay, I see none. Thank you, sir. We will have Mr. Heater respond to your concerns as well as Mr. Salisbury's concerns.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. The intent is not to have any balconies on this property whatsoever. The structure that's in place currently is simply receiving a sheet of plywood and some rubber roof membrane and is not designed in a manner to support any sort of loading whatsoever other than that of the arbor structure that was originally proposed. I'm not here seeking variances for side yard setback and building height. We complied with all of those. This is the rear elevation, and this is currently how it is approved in its building permit form. So these arbor structures were designed and approved with the solid belt line at the mid-body of the house, and simply the structure in between that and the windows was to be an arbor structure. That's the piece we're asking to cover at this point in time. The photograph that the gentleman in front of me showing this arbor, this structure here, that one is going to remain uncovered. It is simply this one and this one here that we're here seeking the additional coverage for. It's not for the house whatsoever, it's simply for the porch structure.
Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Heater at this time? Mr. Charlebois.
Perhaps you can clarify for me, and I guess for everybody in here, what would this look like if you didn't cover it up?
This is exactly how it would look. It always has looked this way.
So this whole elevation would be the same. The only difference is that there's no roof.
That's correct. Yeah.
And it's just some sort of trellis you had.
It was an internal trellis inside of this belt line feature. So you still see that regardless of the variance that we're seeking. You still have that solid belt line feature. The internal components of that were wood features, and they're looking to cover that with a membrane.
And are you looking to enclose this porch at all?
They are not looking to enclose it at all. No, the structure's not in place to do anything additional. Just says it's not in place to become balcony features.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions? I see none. Mr. Heater, if you're satisfied, we can take this matter into committee.
I am.
Okay, ready for a motion, gentlemen? Mr. Hardcastle, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm sensitive to the concerns that I've heard from the residents. The difference between what was approved through the building permit and what is being sought through the minor variances, in my mind, is fairly minor in nature and lacking in true impact upon adjacent properties. For all intents and purposes, it will look exactly the same from the rear yards, from the abutting rear yards. That strong beltline feature would hide the difference between an open pergola and an enclosed roof structure. Based upon the presentation from the architect as well as from the staff report, I will put forward a motion of approval, finding that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Planning Act. And I would put, I would note that there were 7 letters of support, 1 of opposition, and 2 members of the public present who spoke with respect to this matter. I'll put forward the motion of approval subject to 2 conditions. The first being that the proposed dwelling under construction be built in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated September 10th, 2018. And the second being that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Mr. Charlebois.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I have to admit, when I first came here, I was quite skeptical of this particular application, and I just want to echo some of the comments you've heard here. While I appreciate, again, from the residents' point of view, that my personal opinion is I do find this particular structure to be imposing in and of itself. The thing that I'm faced with here as a member of this committee is we're simply looking at the idea that can the applicant put a roof over basically call it the existing porches, and in so doing, the town's way of calculating things requires that that there be a variance to lot coverage, when in fact, to be honest, there is no increase in lot coverage. So when I look at this particular thing, I'm thinking, I may not like myself personally what these porches look like, and they are quite imposing on the back, but they are permitted as of right, and I'm here to simply deal with the idea that can you put a roof on it or not. So on that basis, I'm actually going to support the application.
Thank you, Mr. Charlebois. Are any further discussion? I see none. All those in support of Mr. Hardcastle's recommendations? Okay. The application has been approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Application CAV 133 of 2018 at 2474 South Service Road West. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of committee. My name is Jack Neal. I'm with Ruth Victor and Associates.
Neal, correct? Mr.
Neal,
Neal?
N-E-A-L.
N-E-A-L, yes.
Correct.
Good evening. Who is here for application CEV 1332018 at 2474 South Service Road West? I see none. Okay. Mr. Neal, this is for the car dealership application. Do you have anything further to add? We do have the capacity to forego with the presentation if you're satisfied with the conditions that staff has put in place.
Correct, yeah. I would just add that we read and concur with the comments that are in the staff report as well.
Okay. So are you ready for us to take this matter into committee? Are there any questions of Mr. Neal at this time? Mr. Charleville, go ahead.
Actually, it's a question for planning, just to understand something here in your presentation. This is being done on the basis that if the applicant owned the site, it would be fine, but it's a bit of a technicality because it's a lease. I guess the question I have is, in the remote case that we're going to approve, if we approve, a variance for this particular building, what happens if the other two buildings get sold without this third building?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, it's a great question and something that we contemplated in the preparation of our comments. As you're aware, with zoning, we cannot zone for the specific occupant or user of a property, but we believe that given the intended function of what was trying to be accomplished here with the respect of the insurance and auto body use, that they were compatible uses with respect to the automotive industry that's already well established along the service road. Our concern was that this prestige employment use would potentially get turned over to a not as prestigious auto body shop user, which would devalue the intent of the prestige employment strip in this area. From our perspective, we believe that this was a modification to a regulation that allowed for this use, hence the series of conditions that we've implemented to ensure that this particular use can be accommodated within the existing building only with respect to the other office use or insurance use that would be there within the building and mitigate for the unintended negative impacts of dilapidated vehicles being stored to the rear of the property, where that, again, would not interfere with the intended prestige frontage along the service road.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn. Are there any further questions? Okay, I see none. Mr. Neal, if you're ready for us to take this matter into committee, we will do so.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, ready for a motion? Mr. Charleville, you want to take that over? Sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Madam Chair, having conducted my site visit, also reviewed this particular application, as well as the town staff comments, and I do appreciate a little bit of this clarification this evening. Also taking into account that there are no written or oral objections or letters of support or oral support, for that matter, for this particular application. I do find, though, that this application does meet the 4 tests in the Planning Act. I think it's a good use of the site, and I understand the little technicalities that worked into it, and I think that staff has done a pretty good job here with respect to their conditions in seeking to protect this area. So I will put forward a motion to approve this particular variances as submitted, subject to a series of conditions, if you'll just bear with me, from staff. The first condition is that the existing building be modified in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated August 14, 2018. Condition number 2, that the proposed motor vehicle body shop combined with the motor vehicle repair facility be limited to a maximum floor area of 1,022 square meters, roughly 11,000 square feet, within the existing building only as provided in the submitted site plan and elevations. Condition number 3, that the outdoor storage of motor vehicles is limited to the rear yard of the property while the motor vehicle body shop and motor vehicle repair facility are operational within the existing building. And 4, that a landscape plan be submitted to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning and Services. And I am going to put in this 5th condition because I'm not really sure if there's any proposed work that has to occur in here, so I'll add it in anyway. Subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of this decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed.
Thank you, Mr. Charlevoix. Is there a discussion on these recommendations? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
CEV 134 of 2018 at 72 Dunn Street. Good evening.
My name's Michael Morgan. I live at 390 Sumner Avenue in Oakville. And I'm here to answer any questions with the project at 72 Dunn Street.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Is there anyone here in attendance for CEV 134 of 2018 at 72 Dunn Street? Good evening. Are you in opposition or in support? In opposition. Okay. Mr. Morgan, will you please take us through your application, and then we will have the members in the audience address the committee as well.
Yes, the existing house, which we wish to put a second story on.
You can kindly just speak into the microphone. That would be very helpful.
The existing house at 72 Dunn Street was built probably in the 1940s. The setback on the south side was existing, and it does not comply with existing zoning, and it is now 0.707 meters from the property line. As a result of the creation of the townhouse development, and a variance was allowed for this setback, and the building is otherwise complies with all zoning that is in place at the present time. We wish to put a second story on the well, I would like to replace the existing frame structure because of the nature of it. I would like to see that it's properly insulated, and the removal of the stucco on the outside and the broken plaster on the inside, both of which are in terrible condition, would involve a very big mess for the community, and I would like to replace the framing on the ground level and put the second story on the existing building platform. So those are basically what we want to do with the property.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Are there any questions? I see none. We'll invite the members in the audience to address the committee. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Glenn Petrowski. We live at 66 Dunn Street, which is the property immediately south of 72 Dunn. We've lived there since 1981, and so that clearly we've understood the evolution, the development of the property. And so that back in 1986, we were certainly aware that there was going to be a townhouse development that would happen, and that we were supportive of the idea of maintaining the streetscape at the time. And so that if I might just show you the diagrams that we have put together. Excuse me. I'm not quite familiar with this, but on the north end of this page, you'll see that the house in question originally had a committee adjustment decision that did allow that in fact the building could be 0.707 away from the property line. And so that this broken line represents the 6-meter setback that is actually required, that in fact this is a rear yard rather than a side yard. So the understanding that we had back in 1986 was that there was going to be a streetscape that would be protected, and that the existing house, of course, would remain, and that there would be a continuation of the 6-meter setback for all other parts to the property, except for the fact that the wall was going to be closer to the property line. So that was important to us, of course, to ensure that there couldn't be any addition to the existing footprint. Subsequent to that, there was a deck that was constructed, and so that deck, in fact, was built without a permit. A permit was applied, but it was canceled. However, the deck still was constructed. We thought that they had a permit to construct the deck, but they didn't. You can see that, in fact, the deck is actually closer to the property line as compared to where the proposed variance is. And so the deck currently, as it is right now, is illegal. When we take a look at what's being proposed, the variance is very minor from the perspective of the encroachment to the property line. It basically is only 3.5 inches, which would permit outsolation to be installed. But the question is constructability. Recognizing that it's so tight to our property line, I'm questioning what is the method of construction that is going to be employed, particularly since I just heard that there is going to be reconstruction of that whole framed wall. So recognizing that we're approximately 2 feet from the property line, it's going to be a difficult task and intrusive from the perspective of how that framing would happen and how workmen are going to have access, because there is no other access. So our concern really is that with this application that is being made, not only from the perspective that in '86, when the streetscape was important, and it was a 1.5-story building that existed, and we're prepared to certainly accept that. Now we're talking about a 2-story that is going to actually be reconstructed, a new house along that edge. And we want to ensure, of course, that the same intent exists, that in fact there would never be any opportunity where that new setback of, I believe it's 6.56, would be extended along the backside of the property. And the importance of that is that this zone allows that there is no restriction to coverage, that in fact you can build 3 stories in height. If someone was granted the opportunity to consider this to be a 0.656 setback all along that back property line, it would literally be a significant wall that we would have to deal with. It not only would affect us, but it would also affect all of the other 3 properties that are part of this overall block. There's a balcony that is here, and quite frankly, we have issue with it, but if you were to grant this variance, there's the illegal porch that exists as well, which we would certainly never want to see enclosed if that was the intent. So if this porch had been actually constructed legally, the broken line that is here represents the 1.5-meter setback that would be required. So you can see that graphically, the broken line that is that edge is where the court or the veranda currently is, which is beyond the face of the wall, which is the 0.656 dimension that's requested. The south property line, this is the elevation that we've seen. Thanks, David. That has been presented to us. And so, again, because this wall is as close as it is to the property line, under the Ontario Building Code, if you want to have unprotected openings, you have to be set back 1.2 meters away from the property line. And so I recognize that the Committee of Adjustment is not able to grant a variance to the Ontario Building Code, but the reality being that the maximum aggregate of unprotected openings for anything less than 1.2 meters is 0. So you can't have any windows along this face. And so if this is what we should be viewing as an application, we've got an elevation that could not be constructed, and the building department would deny this. The only way that you would be able to do it would be to have an alternate solution, which would include such things as fire shutters that might need to be put into these openings, or sprinkler systems. If it's a fire shutter, then it would encroach, thank you, sorry. It would encroach even further into this very minimal setback. So David Nelson, in fact, we retained, because we saw these drawings for the first time about 10 days ago, and so we just put this information together. Our real concern really is what the potential future might be, in fact, if this variance was granted, because who knows who the future ownership might be. We've been here for a long time. We intend to continue to be there for a long time, and we don't really need to go through it again. David, is there anything?
Madam Chairman, David Nelson, Planning Consultant, 382 Bartos Drive, Oakville, Ontario. I am here on behalf of Mr. Piotrowski and his wife, Gail Damon. Following up on Mr. Piotrowski's comments, and I want to display this particular document that is extracted from the zoning bylaw. As you can see, a rear yard extends from side lot line to side lot line, which is the very issue that Mr. Piotrowski identified a few minutes ago. The concern about approving a lesser rear yard, which would then allow for additional portions to be added to that building, extending along that common lot line between 66 Dunn and 72 Dunn. So I would suggest that if you're inclined to approve this application, that you put something in there that identifies this particular variance as applying to the footprint of the existing building, and thereby precluding further additions to this building. Secondly, with respect to that deck that's in the rear yard, as Mr. Piotrowski identified, it is illegal, non-conforming, or non-complying, sorry. It does not meet the required setback from that particular property line, the setback being 1.5 meters. The former owner, I do know who he was. I was involved with him at one point. So it's 2 generations back from the current ownership. He did apply for a building permit for this deck, and then the permit was canceled. So the deck was constructed without benefit of a building permit. So as I said, it's illegal, non-complying, and probably subject to a zoning or a bylaw enforcement action. So again, any approval of his application, I think, should not give any validity to the deck by identifying a longer portion of the rear yard. Thirdly, with respect to the issue of the unprotected openings. Mr. Piotrowski did identify the fact that shutters would protrude another 0.3 of a meter into the required yard. I had a look at table 4.5.3 in the zoning bylaw. I see nothing in there that allows that projection to happen. I see allowance for projections for chimney breaches, cornices, roof overhangs, situations like that, but I see nothing for a fire shutter.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Petrowski. Are there any questions of either gentleman at this time? Mr. Charlebois.
Gentlemen, you raised a ton of points. I'm going to hammer in, though, with respect to just the particular variance. And I understand your concern about this variance being extended, and we'll get to that one. If the variance was permitted for only the existing house, in other words, the request from the applicant that he can build a second story, keeping with the same variance, would you still be objecting to it? And I'm going to, two things. Like again, forgetting the windows and that stuff, but there were two things. One was, would you object to the idea that that the applicant can put a second story on this? And the other concern I believe you raised was, how is he physically going to do that? But again, I'm not positive about that one either. I just want to know about, would you object if you just wanted to put it on the existing building?
You're asking us about a lot of what ifs. The only thing that I can really address is what is shown to us now, and so that what we're showing now, in fact, is unacceptable as a result of the specifics such as the windows, the concern about the constructability, the concern that is there going to be more that is going to come as a result of correction that might be necessary before a building permit actually can be granted. So from our perspective, we would need to see something which is much more definitive, so we have absolute clarity as to what was being constructed as compared to what might be proposed.
Okay, but from our point of view and what we're being asked to look at here, for example, the comment about the windows is a building permit issue. It's beyond the scope of this committee and even my knowledge, although I do totally believe you that your research shows that it can't be done. I don't feel that our approval here would grant windows. That's not what we do. With respect to the access on the site, again, it's not really something that I acknowledge. I mean, I'm not exactly sure how they would get there and how they would do that. But again, that doesn't become a point for us to debate. The 2 points that I see are your concern that granting this not extend beyond the existing physical building. And then again, my question still remains that, and I know it's difficult, sir, I appreciate it, but I'm only being asked to look at one thing. And you haven't really raised an objection that says, I don't want him to put a second story here. You've raised an objection that says, the porch is illegal, I don't like the windows, I'm not sure how he's going to access it. All these are valid points. I'm not trying to put them down, but that's not the question I have to deal with.
On the point of elevation, once the application would go to the buildings department, they would take a look at the elevation as presented to the Committee of Adjustment, and so that it would be inconsistent with what has been presented to the committee. And so that typically a Committee of Adjustment, I don't know whether Oakville will look at it that way, would reject it by just stating that the committee had the opportunity to see a different application than what the building permit application drawings look like.
You know, I'm going to field that question actually over to our planner just because she's trying to hide there. Let her. I know it's beyond our purview to talk about the building permit again, and my understanding is that if we approve this generally in accordance with this thing, this is not impose any condition upon the building department to accept the windows as presented. I mean, we still have building code and fire code to deal with. That has nothing to do with our approval.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, as you've indicated, there were two concerns that were being raised. One was the extent that the variance would be limited to the building footprint as it sits today. And second being that the set of plans that you have in front of you to evaluate would essentially be compared with a future building permit application. The conditions that are generally applied in an approval, similar to staff's recommended condition, which is that the approval would apply to the plans as submitted, so they could not extend any further structures and apply the same rear yard. This particular variance is reflective of the proposed second story. And we are confident that that would be maintained through the building department review as per normal practice. With respect to the elevation, the intent of securing an approval with respect to the plans are generally to ensure that there's a certain, the response and the massing and the scale of the building are reflected in the decisions made. It is not uncommon for modifications to the building plans to reflect modification to window sizes and openings, door locations, etc., to still be within the purview of general accordance, which is the structure of the condition that is before you. In this particular case, I recognize that the elevation on that side of the house has a window today. I appreciate that the era of which the building was constructed, that might not have been the issue, but the new construction would definitely have to comply with the current building code requirements. Therefore, if it is the case that this building is a flat wall, again, due to the proximity of the neighboring property, or if they are able to implement an alternative solution, that is up to the building department through their building permit review to ensure that those concepts are addressed. I believe it would still be in keeping with the general accordance of the plans that you're seeing today, as it doesn't affect the mass or scale of the building that we would see in that instance. I would also add that the applicant, the streetscape was a concern of staff's as well, and at the request of staff, the applicant did submit in their package a streetscape plan that would identify the coordination between this new addition and the abutting property, which is within the Heritage District, which is where our concern lies in terms of ensuring that the development was compatible. Heritage staff have reviewed these plans and have indicated that they believe that there is compatibility with respect to the building outside the Heritage District next to the Heritage District. So staff's comments are reflective of this evaluation and again are reflective in the condition that we've requested.
And just to help out the applicant as a follow-on, and those answers were great. This bit about there's only 2 feet between the existing building and the property line, and this is the area that the people have to construct in. I know that in the past, where we've seen these, actually we've seen structures like right on the property line, we've ended up denying them because it's physically impossible to access. Perhaps you could just explain what happens, you know, because I don't want to say anything because I'm not entirely sure, but what happens with respect to the contractor coming in and wanting to build this particular second floor, given that he's got a limited amount of space?
Through Madam Chair, I believe that question is actually better directed to the applicant for them to explain how their construction process would work. I'm not an expert in understanding those processes. To respond to your initial thought in terms of what we have seen in the past, generally speaking, when we're looking at development that is in close proximity to property line, it's usually where that buffer is actually not provided to have approximately 2 feet, which is actually the minimum setback for an accessory building of sorts. We believe that that's a considerable distance in order for certain maintenance to occur. The construction technique to get it to that particular state, I'll leave with the applicant to better define how they're going to approach it.
Very well. Are there any further questions of Mr. Nelson or Mr. Petrowski before we move to Mr. Morgan? No, I see none. Mr. Morgan, the floor is yours. Sir, Actually, I've allowed you a lot of leeway. You've gone over the 5 minutes and then the second 5 minutes that Mr. Nelson has. I'd like to hear what Mr. Morgan has so we can...
Sure. Not a problem.
Thank you.
You have any questions?
The question directed to you is concerning the construction and the capacity to actually undergo that process with the limited amount of space that you have, being the 2 feet.
Well, most of the construction will be accessed through the front of the property. We will have to work on the face of the building, that south face of the building, and to stucco it. And we would then have to build some structure in there temporarily in order to provide that stucco finish on the outside of the building. And
Like scaffolding, you mean?
Pardon me?
Like a scaffolding structure?
There are many kinds of structures we could put in there. The most common would be a scaffold.
Okay.
A scaffold structure would be the most common, but there are other kinds of structures that could be used that could sit within the 2 feet if our neighbor was not willing to give us access to that 2 feet. To put the scaffold in there, we could put a rising pump kind of lift. That's give us access and allow the workmen to do the stucco work on that side of the building.
Have you had a chance to discuss with Mr. Petowski these issues so that you can ease his concerns with respect to this construction? I mean, after all, he is the direct neighbor.
I would be happy to sit down with him and talk about it and try and work something out so that this can be done in a way that he is happy with.
Okay. Are there any further questions of Mr. Morgan? I see none. There are a lot of issues that Mr. Petrovsky has raised. Do you care to respond to any of them before we take this matter into committee?
We made great effort to try to make this particular building transition from the townhouses that are attached to this particular building. We brought the roof down. We could have put a 12-meter building in there if you know that was permitted, and we didn't. We're very, very, very close to the 9 meters, which is you know, transitions into Mr. Petrovsky's house and the massing of it. We made the house look traditional so that it looks and blends with the neighborhood. In terms of the setback, we're asking not for 3.5 inches. I'm asking for 2 inches to put styrofoam stucco on the outside of the structure in order to provide better insulation of the building and meet the building code, is what we're asking for. It's 2 inches. I don't think that's a lot. I was not present. I don't know what happened with the deck. I don't know the history of the deck, who had permits, who did not have permits, what was built without permits. What you see is what is there at the present time in terms of the deck. If the building department says, you know, that to meet the building code, we cannot have openings on that side of the building, there will not be openings on that side of the building. That's the way the process works, and it'll be a blank surface. I don't know of any shutters that are a foot wide or stick out the building a foot, and we don't propose to put any shutters like that on the building. I don't know, you know, what's going to happen in the future. That's you know, that's for other people to decide. We're looking at what we want to do, we'd like to do today. The balcony is permitted in this particular situation. in the townhouses. It's part of the zoning, and we are permitted to put that in there. It's legal. So we're asking for 2 inches and to put the second story on the building.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Are there any questions? Okay, if you have nothing further to add, we'll take this matter into committee. Mr. Charlebois, you'll field this.
Yes, Madam Chair. It's been a good one. Just in terms of the preamble, having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, also taking into account that we had a fair amount of information presented in here by the public and some responses from the applicant as well as staff. I just want to use this time to look at a couple of things. The first thing is perhaps, Mr. Morgan, having seen many of these things occur in the downtown area where people are essentially on top of each other in these older things, we usually end up with some sort of a discussion like this if you haven't actually gone out and talked to each one of your neighbors and got them on side, because the questions that they raise in many, many cases have very little to do with necessarily with the variance, not taking away that there were some comments here, but usually have to deal with how is all this going to impact me, and so I would suggest, since you haven't, that you find the time to speak with this applicant if this committee sees fit to approve the variance. The second one, with respect to the porch, it's nothing that we can deal with here. If you do have a problem with the porch, I'm assuming that there's, and it's a zoning bylaw infraction, I'm sure you can get great advice on how to deal with it. So I can't comment on that. I also can't comment necessarily on whether 2 feet is enough to do the construction. Because despite the fact that we may approve the variance, if the applicant can't construct it, the variance will eventually expire and will go away. So it's, again, not for me to make a decision on. So I'm left with really the 2 points here, which is I've got an existing building, which is it's not set back as per the existing bylaw, and the applicant's looking at putting a second story on here. And what they've done with respect to this thing is, according to the town, and I do believe looking at the streetscape, have integrated this in fairly well. This is typically something that we see many, many times and that we would approve, obviously taking into account a lot of your concerns about how it's to be constructed. But the particular application to take an existing building like this and add a second story is something that I've seen many times in the past, and I've always approved it, and I'm going to do the same here, or at least I'm going to make a motion to that effect. So, having said all that, I am going to put forward a motion that this particular variance be approved. I will note one last thing. Your concern was that that this particular variance not extend beyond the building, and I'm very comfortable with the conditions that I'm going to give you that can't happen. So, on that basis, I'm putting forward the variance subject to the condition that the proposed renovations and additions be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated September 4th, 2018, and subject further to the condition that this approval will expire 2 years from the date of this decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed.
Thank you, Mr. Charlebois. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay. I'm opposed. Your application has been approved. Application CAV 135 of 2018 at 2190 Margate Street.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Luis Acosta. I'm the owner of 2190 Margate Street.
Good evening, Mr. Acosta. Is there anyone here for application CAV 135 of 2018 at 2190 Margate Street? Okay, I see none. Sir, we are familiar with your application. We have done our site visits, and our bylaw allows us to forego the presentation. If you have nothing further to add or you'd like to address the committee, this is your time to do so. If not, we can take this matter into committee.
I'm satisfied with the conditions, so we can go.
Okay. Are there any questions of Mr. Acosta at this time? Mr. Hardcastle, you have one.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just was seeking some clarity with respect to the driveway width and the impact upon the tree. Is there an actual widening of the driveway proposed to accommodate the 2 parking spaces? I noted in my site visit that the asphalt falls right on the edge of that existing tree. So I'm just looking for a bit of clarity with respect to that.
Okay. Yes, Madam Chair. There will be a widening of the driveway closer to the house to the extent that a second car can be parked in that area, but the tree will be protected. We won't touch the tree.
So you're looking at not having a straight side on that side of the driveway, but curving it around the tree?
That's correct, yes.
Because that's not consistent with what the site plan drawing shows.
If I'm allowed to go to the projector just to discuss the check.
Or am I misreading that?
So what we're proposing here is to enlarge this driveway enough space to allow for 2 cars to park in front of the house. But the tree in this area will be protected. It won't be touched. It will stay protected. So this edge of the driveway will come straight to this area, and the space to go into the driveway will be enough to maneuver into this position.
Would you be kind enough to draw that for me, how you think it would look? Would you draw that on that so that I can take a look at so I can see that?
Sure, let me try to do it here. So this will be that edge.
Yeah.
And then it will come just here. And this will be the other edge of that driveway.
So there's no proposed change to the west side of the driveway edge? All of the widening would be on the east side and surround the tree at the canopy drip edge?
That's correct.
Are there any further questions? I see none. Mr. Acosta, if you have nothing further to add, we can take the matter into committee.
I am okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Flemington, thank you.
having conducted my site visit and reviewed the applicant's written submission, as well as the town's written staff report, noting that it is in support of, I'm going to move a motion that the application be approved as submitted, including the condition that the proposed renovations be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated September 2018, Also noting the comments of the applicant with regards to the driveway and how it will be paved according to the tree being protected. In addition, I'd like to add the condition that it is, subject to the condition that the approval will expire 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed, noting that there were no letters in support and no letters in opposition.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Flemington. Is there a discussion on these recommendations? Mr. Charlebois?
I just need a clarification just because of the way you read this. So when you're reading the condition, you said subject to the condition that the driveway would be curved and everything. Is that part of the conditions, or are you just making a comment about that? Like, did you want to make it, were you adding another condition to this thing?
I was adding that to the, based on the plans and elevations submitted.
Okay.
I was noting that the tree was being protected.
So that's part of the condition?
Yes.
Okay.
Say it again. That the proposed renovations be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated September 2018 as amended by the applicant's presentation protecting the tree and that the paving will be completed in a curved manner by the drip, I think it was by the drip line of the tree. Is that correct?
Cockburn, I think you have a comment. Cockburn, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's of any assistance, perhaps I can clarify the proposed condition in that the proposed renovations be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated September 2018, subject to a driveway design that protects the existing tree to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning. The reason for that particular language is that there are a multitude of ways that the driveway in of itself could be constructed with or without a curve that would still protect for the tree, and it may be more appropriate to allow for that process and the appropriate staff expertise to weigh in on this particular matter. Staff were generally satisfied that there is a curve there now, but in the interest of the committee, I would support this amendment to that particular condition and ensure that the proper evaluation of the driveway be conducted through that process.
Okay.
I have it written.
Okay. Very well. Mr. Costa, you're agreeable with these conditions?
I agree with them.
Perfect. Is there any further discussion? I see none. All those in support of the recommendation as stipulated? Very well. Okay. Sir, your application has been approved.
Thank you.
Application CAV 136 of 2018 at 1550 Bayview Road. Good evening.
Good evening.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Arlie Hack, planner at Glen Schnarr & Associates, located at 10 Kingsbridge Garden Circle in the city of Mississauga, L5R 3K6.
I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name.
Hack.
Hack, okay. Thanks. Is there anyone here for application 136 of 2018 at 1550 Bayview Road? I see none. Okay. Ms. Hack, we're familiar with your application. We've done our site visits. This is an interior renovations only. There's no changes to the existing built form, as we know.
Nope.
Do you have anything further to add to your application?
We would like to add 3 letters of support from surrounding neighbors.
Okay. You can hand those over to the Secretary Treasurer.
But other than that, we've read the staff report and agree with all staff comments.
Very well, thank you. Are there any questions of Ms. Hack at this time? I see none. Are we prepared to move a motion? Sorry? No, there's no one in the audience that's in attendance, and we have 3 letters of support, and there are none for objections.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes, Mr. Hardcastle, sorry.
Having reviewed the materials, including the staff report, I'm satisfied that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Act, and I'll put forward a motion of approval subject to 2 conditions, noting that there were no members of the public present with respect to this matter, but we are in receipt of 3 letters of support with respect to this matter. And the 2 conditions would be first, that the proposed renovations be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevations dated September 7th, 2018, and the second being that the approval expires 2 years from the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been completed.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, your application has been approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Application CEV 102 of 2018 deferred from September 4th for 448 Drummond Road. Okay, while they set up. Who is here in attendance for application CEV 102 of 2018, 448 Drummond Road? Okay. Members in the audience, you are here in support or in opposition? Opposition, very well. Okay, looks like we've got our work cut out for us. Name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lincoln Lowe with Malone Given Parsons, and I am the planning consultant representing the applicant for the application before you this evening. The application is seeking a total of 4 variances to facilitate the construction of a new 2-story single detached dwelling on a lot at 448 Drummond Road. I was in front of this committee about a month ago on September 4th, where I went through the proposal and the application. The feedback that I did receive from the few members of committee was that the variances had merit, but the item was ultimately deferred as there were some discrepancies between the site plan and the elevations. It's my understanding that this issue has since been rectified, but I'm gladly to go through the application quickly again, just to refresh everyone's memory. The lot is located in southeastern Oakville, fronts on the Drummond, which runs on a diagonal. This orientation of Drummond creates a row of irregular lots. The surrounding community is one that's in transition, with many newer build 1.5 and 2-story homes replacing the older pre-existing bungalows. The house in question is one of those remaining bungalows. As a reminder, of the policy context, the lot is split zoned. The RL3-0 residential zone occupies the front portion of the site. The N natural area zone occupies the rear, and the lower Wedgwood Creek runs to the west of the lot, and it is within Conservation Halton's regulation limit. The floodplain and associated setback for this creek actually traverses across the rear portion of many houses along Drummond, in some cases across half of the entire house sited on these properties. The applicant has worked with the Conservation Authority, and through that work, the authority has set the rear development limit as what is existing today. They will permit a new dwelling to be sited in a similar position to the one existing, so as long as it does not move further west beyond the existing rear/west exterior wall. This slide shows the chronology of the variances that have been requested. The original application had 5 variances. Through work with staff, that has been reduced to 4. The remaining 4 include lot coverage, front yard setback, residential floor area ratio, as well as the garage projection. While the maximum floor area ratio appears to have increased from the original application, it's a bit misleading, as planning staff has revised the way that they calculate the calculated lot area for this variance, which has resulted in a smaller lot area. For this variance, what I think is important is that the original application proposed a dwelling that is about 4,140 square feet. It's been reduced following staff comment by around 300 square feet to about 3,850 square feet. Quickly running through the variances, the lot coverage, as you can see here, is the variance for the lot coverage has a lot to do with the fact that the lot is split zoned. Town zoning instructed that only the RL3-0 zone can be used as a site area when calculating this variance. In this case, it essentially removes 1/3 of the lot for these calculations. As mentioned earlier, the applicant has worked with the authority to ensure that the siting of the proposed house would not cause any negative impact to the rear hazard. In this situation, I do agree with town planning's approach in that it would be appropriate to consider the entire site area to calculate coverage as well as residential floor area ratio. If you were to do that, the lot coverage variance drops from the requested 36.28% to 22%, removing the need for a variance. This is actually the same thing in the residential floor area ratio. If you were to use the entire site to calculate this variance, the proposed variance would drop from about 60.5% to 37%. The maximum floor area ratio for a site of this size would be around, I believe, 37%, which is what is being proposed here, so also removing the need for the variance. I just want to show this slide again. It's a quick snapshot of what the immediate neighborhood looks like. You will see 448 is the one with the arrow pointed to it. As it exists currently, it is one of the smallest lots in the entire, smallest dwellings in the entire neighborhood, and it would be the smallest one along Drummond. So this is just a quick switch to what the footprint would be on the revised. You can see that it doesn't look out of place with the footprints that are already existing, and it would make what is being proposed as about average to what the neighborhood is offering. With regards to the front yard setback provision, the aforementioned conservation Halton hazard limit to the rear causes any reconstruction of this site to put a house towards Drummond Avenue, resulting in the required front yard variance. The proposed dwelling would be sited closer to Drummond to provide more prominence to the street, as the existing dwelling is quite set back, almost 10 meters from the property line and around 16 meters from the road. The proposed siting of the new dwelling is set back sufficiently to have cars parked completely on the driveway and not within the public right-of-way. In our discussions with town planning staff, there was a mutual agreement that the importance of the front yard setback provision was to maintain the streetscape pattern along Drummond Road. Whereas the original concept proposed a house almost in line with the house to the north, the revised proposal has reduced the house depth. This positions the house entirely in front of the dwelling to the south and entirely behind the dwelling to the north. This helps maintain the pattern that's already been established with the existing dwelling. The final variance is with respect to the garage projection. The application proposes 2.16 meter projection, where 1.5 meters is permitted. In this case, I believe the slight stagger actually provides a greater articulation to the front elevation. It's a unique architectural element. The surrounding community also has many lots that have a projection larger than 1.5 meters. So that would be a quick run through of all the variances. I've gone through the staff report again. I do agree with staff's comments. I've reviewed the conditions of approval. I know my client is okay with those conditions as well, and I continue to agree that this application is minor. It meets all 4 tests of a minor variance, and I think it represents good planning. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Lowe. Are there any questions of Mr. Lowe at this time? I see none. The members in the audience that are in opposition, would you like to address the committee as a group, or you will individually speak?
I think there's probably 2 or 3 of us that may want to speak individually.
Very well.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Ted Edgar. I have my wife Donna with me here. We reside at 444 Drummond Road, which is the adjacent southern property. We have been residents of Oakville, southeast Oakville, for over 30 years. And in that period of time, we have had 2 major renovations done to our homes, and a renovation or a major rebuild on a lot on Chamberlain Lane where we tore down a house and built a custom-built home. So all this to say, we've got a little bit of experience in building and renovating in certainly southeast Oakville. And they were all the renovations and all the bills were done by accordance with the Town of Oakville bylaws. What our concerns are is that we understand the variance requests. We understand the cornerstone of this committee's criteria in determining if the application meets the laws and variance requirements within the result of building a dwelling that maintains the character and integrity of the neighborhood. We believe that these cornerstones have been compromised, and we've got some information here that I'm assuming that we all share the same information. Donna has been in correspondence with Kate, and we have an email from Kate dated July the 10th, which indicates that this property that this proposed site is to be built on, the maximum size of the house would be somewhere in the area of about 2,900 square feet. So you can imagine when we looked at the initial request, which was for a home of being in the area of about 4,100 square feet, as to what our thoughts were on that. Things have changed. It looks like now the proposed house is somewhere in the area of about 3,800 square feet. And it's before, obviously, a garage is going to be built on it. So how can this happen? How can we build a house this size within the confines of the bylaws of the Town of Oakville and these variance requests? There are a couple of things in particular, more specifically, relating to maximum residential floor area. And it looks like it was set here at 2,660 square feet, and now we're in the area of a little over 3,800 square feet. That's in section 2 of the documents that were presented. Looks like it's September the 4th. In section 4, we talk about the minimum front yard on all that shall be it equate to about 27.69 feet. And it looks like right now 14.8 feet is what is the variance request, which is moving the house about 13 feet forward on the lot. So if this proposed house is built, we would expect it will probably be the largest house on the street. And it's our opinion that this would not represent a dwelling that maintains the character of our neighborhood. When we went through the documentation, and I'm referring to policies 11.1.9 A and B and H. There is a comment in there about the staff considering that should the entirety of the lot be used for the calculation of lot coverage and residential floor area ratio. Well, of course, this changes the percentages in favor of the applicant, as it's a much larger area. In both cases, the size of the dwelling is below the zoning law by law requirements if the lot was not impacted by the natural area or floodplain. But the reality is it is impacted by the natural area of the floodplain as per the town's zoning bylaws. So the question is, why are we trying to fit a square peg in a round hole?
Sir, in the interest of hearing everybody else, your 5 minutes are up. I will give you another 30 seconds to wrap up your thought, and then I'll move to the next,
I've only got a short paragraph left.
Okay, go ahead.
So during the committee's meeting on September the 4th, I believe it was Mark Charlebois who intimated something to the effect of what can be done. The answer to us is relatively simple: build a smaller home. And surely a 2,900 square foot home above grade would be able to accomplish that. That's where we are with this.
Thank you, Mr. Edgar. Are there any questions at this time of Mr. Edgar? Mr. Charlebois.
Sir, you indicated that this home would be the largest in the area. Have you got, I didn't sort of get that from the presentation that the applicant did, but do you have anything that backs up that at, I forget now where he's going to be, at 3,800 square feet, that this will be the largest home?
Do we have specific information as to the square footage of each home on the property?
Right.
The answer to that is no, we do not.
Okay.
But I would expect if it was to be evaluated, it would be, if not the largest home, one of the largest homes.
Okay. The only reason I asked is when I looked at his picture, it just didn't look like that. So, okay, thanks.
Okay. Who is going to address the committee next? Good evening.
Good evening, how are you? I spoke before.
Yes, your name and address, please.
Yeah, it's Derek Johnston, and I live at 439, which is across the street.
Mr. Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Actually, I just wanted to reiterate the point that I had made before, just being here in support, mostly. The house, I agree, it doesn't fit the character of the street. It will be closer to the road than any of the other houses in the area. It will create a large billboard on one side of the house that is not seen on any of the other houses in the area. And that my neighbors will end up in a situation where they've got this huge wall outside their bay window. That's really the point that I wanted to make. I wanted to, I wanted to agree with my neighbor that it doesn't match the rest of the neighborhood. And I didn't think about the fact that it would be as large as it is compared to the other homes, but it certainly would be comparable to the largest homes, only, as the applicant has said, on the smallest lot.
I'm hearing the same, I guess, opposition statements,
Yeah.
and I have to ask, when Mr. Lowe presented his case, you realize that given the entire size of the lot, that this house would fit perfectly on it. It's actually within those parameters. It's just the fact that the zoning is split that way, and it's
Totally
the
agree.
bylaws read
And
differently.
I think Mr. Charlebois brought that up at the last meeting, and I am sympathetic to it. I really am. It just seems weird that you'd have one house so much closer to the road and situated in such a way. Even though I agree with you, the lot is large. There's all kinds of land in the floodplain. Unfortunately, it's not usable. But the buyer would have known that when they bought the lot. They would have known that because they closed on the purchase after our first meeting here. So they would have known that.
But I too am confused, like Mr. Charlebois, from the pictures that we saw. Would you kindly put them up, Mr. Lowe? The pictures of the, yes,
so
that.
This is the original.
So if we take a look at, what the house looks now. I mean, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. And then there's another one with the angle of the frontage of the homes. If you can bring that one up.
Is that the one to the just?
So
to the north of
this
it?
shows the size as built. Okay, yeah, do that one. And then here is the projected kind of alignment of the house. And I'm still not seeing what everyone else is seeing. And I have to share his concerns.
Yeah, sure. So if you look at 448 and you look at where the front lawn is and where the house is, so the back of 452 is in front of.
You mean 444?
Sorry, 444. Sorry, 444, yeah. So the back of the house at 448 is ahead of the house at 444. So when you're coming down the street, or if you're at that corner, you'll end up with this giant billboard. It doesn't look like it from this picture, but I can assure you it is. The other thing is 452 is not as close to the road as 448 appears in this picture. So that line that goes across there, it is somewhat representative of a consistent line, but in fact, 448 will be much closer to the road than 452 and much more than 444 or 438.
Would you agree that we have the same scenario between 438 and 432, and then again between 426 and 420? If that's the argument that we're going to have, I mean, staff is in support of this, and I'm not lobbying for or against. I'm just trying to understand.
Absolutely.
Because what you're seeing is not what we're seeing, and I just want to see the connection.
I love it.
Because I do want to hear the.
I love it. Yeah, no, I love it. So it just so happens that the way the land lies and the way the landscape is in those areas, you can't see those things. You won't notice them. And 432 happens to be a bungalow that's older, and when it's rebuilt, will probably come forward a little bit. It'll match 438 more closely, but not on the south side, on the north side. The difference between 438 and 432, you actually can't see it because there's enough room between them for landscaping and for things to compensate for it, where on 448 there won't be. I walk up and down that street every day, and you don't see those differences just because of the way the houses sit and the way the landscaping's done, you don't see it. But because of the way the house will sit on 448, there won't be any way to compensate for that. You'll literally have a house and then lawn. It'll be very difficult to put anything to change the look of it.
Okay. I needed those clarifications because I want to be able to hear what you have to say and hear the rest of the public as well. Thank you for your submission, sir. Is there any questions of Mr. Johnson at this time? I see none. I'll let the other people who would like a chance at the podium. I'll have you remind you that if a point has been covered, please make another point that has not been covered, just so that we're not repeating ourselves over and over again. Well, please, you haven't had a chance. I will take your name and address for the record, and I will give you your chance.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Do you want me to, how can I show you this?
There's a projector right there if you want to go on that side, and you'll be able to speak at that side as well. I'm assuming you're
Donna Edgar.
You're Edgar's wife, right?
I am.
Yes, okay.
I have sent 2 letters of objection to.
And we do have your letters on file.
Okay. So, okay.
Projector, gentlemen. Perfect.
In my mind, this shows it a little bit more clearly than the other slide, which took me some explanation to understand myself. So we're at 444 here. So this line here is our, this line here is existing setback. Okay? And then the pink line is what they're allowed, the 1 meter in front of the existing. And then the blue line is the property north of them. Do you see what I'm showing here, the blue line? Oh, you do see the colors?
Yes, we do.
And this is what they're proposing. So it doesn't look like a lot on this diagram, but it is significantly more than they're allowed. And that's our major objection. So it may not look like a lot on that slide, but when you look at it here, it's significantly more than, you know, what they're allowed, even more than what, if our house extended as far forward as it could.
Okay, I'll ask you a very simple question, and then Ms. Coburn has something to say. So, other than the fact that it's more than what they're allowed, how does it affect you personally?
I think it's,
That's what variances are for. Like, we have to look at...
way too far forward on the lot, and it is not in sync with the neighborhood. It will look out of sync with the rest of that strip.
So you're just concerned about how it looks with the strip, but it doesn't affect you personally in terms of...
Oh, it affects us majorly by having to look now at this great big wall of a house. We know that the house beside us is old, it's going to be demolished, a new house is going to be built.
And they're going to be 2 stories.
Oh, and there will be 2 stories.
Okay.
So our biggest objection is how much further forward it will be on the lot.
Okay.
That is our major objection.
Perfect. Well heard. Thank you. I appreciate your submission. Ms. Coburn, you had something to say to Ms. Edgar.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, for the record, the material that Ms. Edgar has presented to you are actually staff materials. This was material that in my meeting with Ms. Edgar that we had prepared to demonstrate the angular design of the streetscape in which buildings may over time start to creep forward due to the natural heritage feature that's at the rear of these properties. As you could probably see also from Mr. Lowe's presentation, the floodplain limit, as it extends further south, further impacts those properties and may also result in future variance applications to see new development progress closer to Drummond. The intent of that material was, again, to demonstrate that there is an angular design to the streetscape, which staff were intending to maintain, which is why we had subsequent meetings with the applicant. We requested the initial, or were not supportive of the original application and so forth. So just want to clarify where that material has come from, that it is staff's material to aid in the discussion with Ms. Edgar.
So it's your submission that moving on into the future, this is likely where you would like to see the new developments and the alignment of the new homes on Drummond.
It is staff's position that ultimately we recognize the hardship that is being created as a result not only of the dual zoning, but also with respect to where the top of bank limit will actually lie and the Conservation Authority's requirement to move existing structures out of this area. It would probably be no shock to you if I explain that the properties at 438, 432, and 426 Drummond are likely wholly to be within this regulated area, and upon redevelopment would have to move considerably forward in order for a development to be accommodated on the property. The zoning may allow for something even less than what we would be permitted as of right on the subject property here. And so the nature of the variance would be to allow for some flexibility to see these properties redevelop over time. The intent would be is to maintain that angular streetscape that we are currently seeing on Drummond. Variances to front yard setback may be required, variances to the floor area ratio and coverage as a result. And this has been our experience in this overall neighborhood, as with properties on Avon and Amber Crescent. We've started to see this type of impact where the opposite side of the street is able to develop in full accordance with the bylaw and have houses at the maximum floor area ratio and lot coverage, and the other side of the street is jeopardized by not achieving that same character because of these types of restrictions. That, in our opinion, was not the general intent and purpose of the plan, but more to protect for these types of features, and working through these issues is what we achieved to do.
Thank you, Ms. Coburn, and that is helpful. Are there any questions at this time? Mr. Charlebois?
Just, yeah, back to planning again, just to clarify some things, just so I know. There are really two questions. The new bylaw implemented this split zoning. Did the old bylaw have that too?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, it did not. And as per the email Mr. Edgar referenced from July, in providing some clarity to hopefully respond to some of the concerns that they had, the additions and renovations that they themselves had undertaken prior to that bylaw coming into effect may not have actually been in line with the bylaw today. If it were done today, they might be faced with the same challenges in improving their property if they were to comply with the bylaw themselves. We would also point out that the nature of staff not supporting the original application also spoke to the design and the exposure of that southerly wall and our insistence in ensuring good urban design in terms of what was being exposed there. There are a number of mature trees along the edge, which also helps to buffer what you would naturally see. However, should some of those trees start to come down, you would be exposed to that natural facade of each of these buildings, which are situated further ahead of everybody's property. That's just the natural alignment of how these buildings were situated, and over time, those trees have grown and filled in.
Okay. My second question is, again, to refresh my memory, did the Conservation Authority increase their hazard area over the last little while?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, the Conservation Authority has increased their regulatory area as well as their regulations and practices. So again, the requirements to ensure that new development happen outside of those regulatory limits has in fact increased, and that can be notably aligned with some of the more severe storms that we've experienced here in Southern Ontario in terms of how we would be accommodating some of these flooding hazards.
Okay. And getting back to this alignment then, this is my last question. And not wanting to put any words at all into your mouth, so I got the idea that what you were saying was the whole street alignment from basically, I'm looking at sort of 448 going to 444, 438, 432, 426. It's staff's opinion that based on this new change to the bylaw, the conservation hazard areas, that in fact, in time, all of these buildings will move forward. And are you essentially saying that 448 is just the first one?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, it would be our opinion in terms of understanding you plan for things in the future that we could expect in the longer term that there would be a transition in terms of what the setback would be along Drummond. Again, each application is evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and it's not just to say that there's going to be a hard and fast line as to what those setback rules are going to be. In the case of the subject application, again, staff were not supportive of the original proposal just by virtue of the restrictions or limitations that the property presented. There was considerable work to be evaluated with respect to our urban design guidelines, our review of the official plan policies, notably 11.1.9, in terms of how that streetscape character was intended to be maintained and ensuring a high quality design, urban design was being visualized from the public realm, from the streetscape. We would apply those same rules, if not further improvements to those rules going forward for any property that is subject to these similar restrictions.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone in the audience who hasn't spoken who would like a chance at the podium? Okay,
Hello.
good evening.
Good evening. I'm Norma Hidaka, Mark Hidaka, and we
Hidaka.
are 452 Drummond.
452, yes, I
We're
see.
on the
north side? Yes.
And we haven't anything prepared. We came to, support everything that our neighbors have said, so we will not repeat ourselves.
I appreciate that.
However, we would just like to give you our input. Like our neighbors, we knew that this building, this bungalow, would eventually be knocked down. And and we're very open to a new house being built, but what surprised us was the size of the house that's being built. And this house will greatly affect our living in our home as it is. For example, the side will block out a lot of our light into our garden, affecting our plants, affecting our view, affecting our way of life. And so that's only from the back part of our house. Looking out at the front, our view will be totally impacted because we will be seeing a driveway, and we do have a concern about the tree where the builders are going to create the driveway. And the tree belongs to the town, and we don't see how the driveway is going to work with the tree being where it is. And we'd hope that the town doesn't take down the tree or destroy the tree because of this driveway. And so when we look out our front window, we're going to be seeing the structure of the house next door, and on our back garden is going to be seeing the house of the structure of the house next door. So we felt that we should give you our comment, and that we challenge that these people can make such a huge house in such a smaller lot.
I have a question, and maybe that'll help clarify things for everybody in the public. Ms. Coburn, can you comment on, if we were looking at the old bylaw, would this house be in compliance without any variances? And would they have been able to build it as of right? And essentially the neighbors would not have known that this house is, I will use the quotation marks, big, because that's what people see when they get these reports, is this house is going above and beyond the zoning bylaw, what is permitted. So can you comment on that? And perhaps
through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, under the previous zoning bylaw and the practices that were implemented in these particular situations, the size of the house in terms of the lot coverage and the floor area ratio would not have required variances. Again, notwithstanding that the Conservation Authority has also increased their regulated area and their restrictions, which is actually causing the house to move forward. If we were looking at the possibility of what would have happened under the former bylaw, similar to the residents at 444, they may have been able to build to the back of the property. So that's a newer restriction as well, and it's not clear to me whether or not they would have been forced to move forward, or if they actually could have positioned the house more in line with the dwellings, which is the nature of the front yard setback that's at issue as well.
Very well, thank you. And the reason I asked that question is I wanted everyone to hear it. This is what our job is. We have to look at the applications that are presented to us. We have to look at the parameters. We have to look at the different restrictions that come with these properties, and that's why there are variances, because every scenario and every situation is unique to its form and it's unique to its positioning. So you can appreciate the tough job that we have and in terms of making those decisions, but that does not negate at all your submissions and what you have to say and how we have to take all of it into consideration. So we appreciate your submission, and we do take it into consideration.
In terms of my question about the light that's going to, we're not going to get the sunlight into our back garden and into our, where we sit at our patio. All of that's going to be taken away by this structure. So we cannot challenge that?
No, I mean, it's not that you can't challenge it. We respect your submission. We hear your voice. We can't limit developments because of sunlight or shading. You know, there are developments that will be built as of right. You might have been in a situation where you've had a bungalow for all these years, and now you are going to have a 2-story home, which is as of right someone's right to build. So yes, it's going to affect you inadvertently, but it's not of any fault of their own. Do you understand what we're saying?
We actually did build from a bungalow to a 2-story home in 1312 Amber Crescent.
Okay.
And we did it in fitting with the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so we built it to a Cape Cod style in fitting with the neighborhood. This house that's going to be built next door to ours is not in keeping with the neighborhood. It's much too big, and it's closer to the road, and in effect, it's going to ruin our lifestyle, ours and Donna and Ted Edgar's as well as Derek's opposite because of the size of it. And would you like to look into a driveway and cars and a garage? Would you like to have?
And all of those things are going to be handled within the procedure of the site plan. The trees are going to be taken care of. Everything will be done according to the plans that are submitted. So those are things that we cannot comment on, but they will be held to those standards. I'm going to let my colleagues comment if they have one, if they have more comments. But what I want to end with is, we have to take all of these matters into consideration, and it's staff submission that this does fit within the neighborhood and fit for the development of the land. So while we understand the constraints that it's going to bring to your property per se, we have to look at the entire application and overlook of everything. So thank you for that. I think we've already gone over those 5 minutes. I've given a lot of leeway for this application, Mr. Johnson. I don't know what else can be said. By all means, we've gone this long. I will extend you that small courtesy. But there are going to be, I mean, you have no crystal ball in knowing if there's going to be any further development. If any of you are going to get a good deal and sell your homes and someone else is going to redevelop it, we have to keep looking at motion forward and what's presented before us. I do not dispute in any shape, way, or form what you're feeling and your concerns. And on that note, I do need your drawing that you put on the, that's part of the submissions that Ms. I've lost my train of thought. Jasmina. Yes, Ms. Edgar. Yes.
It's zoned for a reason that way. We chose to live on that side of the road because of the creek. I don't care about the people on the other side. They don't have a creek to deal with. They don't have different zoning. So how can you say that the percentage should be based on the whole lot when zoning is in place because we live on a creek? Doesn't make sense.
Okay, I appreciate everyone's submissions. Are there any further questions or any items of clarification? Mr. Lowe, this is your final 5 minutes to tackle all of the concerns of your neighbors.
Sure.
And I think our questions were particularly for us to understand where they're coming from, because there was a disconnect between what we're seeing and what they're seeing, so we needed those clarifications. But please, take your time appropriately and answer all their questions.
I won't repeat much of what Kate had already mentioned. I think she did an excellent job explaining kind of the policy context and the history of the policy evolution for this area. But I did hear, I guess, quite a few comments about this being overbuilt. So I do just want to kind of give a background of where we got this data from. This is actually from the town's open data source. Like, these footprints are gathered from the town. So it's not as if our firm generated these. It's from the data, and we just overlaid it onto an aerial photo. The only change is on this photo where I overlaid the revised footprint onto the aerial photo. With regards to it being overbuilt, I actually drove this exact snapshot, and then I marked with a little notepad, 1 story, 1.5 story, 1.25 story, 2 story, and I applied, math on the footprint on all of them, and I can very confidently say, even in the most conservative approaches, where if a house was closer to 2 stories, I still used 1.5 just to be conservative, that the the proposed house would still be middle of the pack. Maybe I think I can't remember how many houses. I think it was about 70 some odd dwellings that we did this for, and it was maybe 40th or 45th. It wasn't, yes, it wasn't 35 exactly, but I would consider that the middle range. And with regards to the front yard setback, I do hear the concern about it being closer, but it was through our talks with town planning that there is an existing stagger that is already in place with the old dwelling, which is the house to the north is in front of this house, and this house is in front of the house to the south. And that was of paramount importance in how this was cited and how this was proposed. And I do believe that the applicant has done as hard of a job as they can to try to appease all the different concerns. And that is why I guess this diagram exists in terms of trying to maintain that stagger that has already been established with the existing dwelling. So I hope that's enough, but I do have, I am here if you have any other questions.
Mr. Lowe at this time. Mr. Charlebois, go ahead.
Just help me out, because it's tough when you're driving the site and you're looking at it. So you've told me that if I look at these buildings, 462, 458, 450, all those ones along there that kind of fit within this small pocket of the neighborhood, and you've outlined them in yellow. These are the building footprints?
Yes. From the city's
From the
data.
city's stuff?
Yeah.
And you've depicted your 448 as accurately as you can in terms of its size?
That's right.
And okay, I'm just missing why this is the biggest building on the street. I just don't see it. But
In my work that I did, and just like the gentleman said, I also don't have every square footage of the dwelling, but
no,
I tried the best
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for that question either, so.
Yeah. I tried the best I could at guesstimating how big the houses were, and it's firmly in the middle range of everything that's within the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks.
It's
Ms. Edgar, that is, while I appreciate you need the answer to your questions, there is a form to this meeting. Questions should be directed to the chairperson, and while you've had your submissions, now it's Mr. Lowe's submission time to reply to your concerns, and then we take this matter into committee. So I would encourage you to ask those questions after the meeting. I'm sure he'll be happy to spend a few minutes. He was in the prior time that he was here, so you can do that. It's okay. Are there any further questions of Mr. Lowe?
Not Mr. Lowe, but again, planning. I seem to recall at one time that the town of Oakville was re-looking at this whole problem with respect to, well, I won't call it a problem, but the difficulty that this new bylaw has caused in terms of this, because we're encountering this every single time. So.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, you are correct. This issue with respect to the calculation of residential floor area and lot coverage as it relates to the stable top of bank on a property was brought to our attention earlier, maybe late last year, earlier this year, by another property on Avon Crescent, and that definitely caused us to look at how we are structuring the notice and ensuring that adequate notice and the intent of the variance is being clear, which is why it's quite lengthy. It is on the housekeeping list. However, we have yet to proceed with bringing that bylaw forward at this time, as we are still conducting our research on the items for that housekeeping list that need to be brought forward. It is definitely something we are aware of. I do believe that our comments are reflective of the direction and the intent that we believe the official plan and the zoning bylaw was intended to do by providing split zoning, by acknowledging that there is a stable top of bank that affect properties, and it is our belief that it was intended not only to protect for the natural features on the building, but to ensure that the massing and scale of a dwelling maintains the character, the predominant character within this neighborhood. And we have to look at the properties that are not subject to these types of restrictions as contributing to that character and how they fit. So that is essentially the direction that we would continue to look at this matter, and we continue to respond to variances accordingly as they're presented.
Again, so you're saying that this bylaw, if you want, is being looked at as a housekeeping measure. What was that means that you can see that there's some problems here, so you're perhaps going to look at amending it to change it, and you're saying that the staff comments here at least reflect what you think staff is going to recommend to council?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the committee, a housekeeping bylaw amendment or housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment is a type of bylaw that reflects on the smaller technical matters of the bylaw that are essentially not working the way that we intended them to function. We look at the trends of variances that are coming forward and whether or not those variances could be better dealt with by looking at the intent of the bylaw and what it was supposed to do. In the preparation of that report, we have to provide the necessary analysis and data and understanding of why we're choosing to amend the bylaw in what we would believe as minor amendments to the bylaw to ensure that the bylaw is living to its full potential. That work has yet to be completed. This particular matter is on the list, and it is anticipated it will be brought forward in the future.
Thank you. Any further questions? I see none. Mr. Lowe, if you have nothing further to add, we will take this matter into committee. And before you leave the podium, would you kindly give your address to the Secretary Treasurer or provide her with your business card? Sure. Because we do have to have it on record.
That's no problem. Do it after.
Okay, members, I'm in your hands. I know this is a difficult one. We've had a lot of submissions from both the public as well as the applicant and town staff. Who is ready to move a motion? I'll give you a minute. Mr. Charlebois.
Okay. Madam Chair, just get the preamble out of the way. Having conducted my site visit, reviewed the applicant's written submission as well as the town's written staff report, I do note that the town is in support of these 4 variances as requested here. And clearly, we have a significant amount of the direct residents in the area that are not in support of these variances. And respecting all of everybody's opinion here, when I look at it, variance number 1, which was to permit the attached private garage to project, the town was in support. There was no objections from the public, and so I don't think this particular variance matters, so I'm okay with this one. The area that we then have to deal with is variance number 2, variance number 3, and variance number 4. And we've heard evidence presented both in writing and here from our planning staff with respect to the complexities related to this particular project. The changes back in 2014 to our bylaw and moving into the split zoning, the changes by the Conservation Authority that are increasing the hazard area and imposing development constraints. And in return, we've also heard from the public that says, you know, we appreciate these changes that are happening here, but, you know, we believe that this is the character of our street and we'd like it to be maintained that way. And so I need to balance their concerns, which are perfectly valid, against the town's stance. And I think we heard from our planner that the town realizes that they have some difficulties with respect to how this new bylaw was written, and that the intent of the bylaw probably isn't the exact words that were in here. And what I'm hearing is that their particular submission here is trying to reflect the intent of the bylaw. And then the other person, of course, which, you know, we hear from their agent, but we don't really, because I guess maybe there isn't a true applicant, is the right of a property owner to be able to develop his site to its greatest potential. I guess is probably the wrong word, but I can't come up with something else right now. When I look at all of these things, I find that this particular application, and it's very unfair, perhaps even for the members here as well as for the public, it's highly technical. And taking into account what everybody has said in here, I find I'm going to have to rely on my experts in this particular area, which is the town of Oakville, and give more weight to their particular presentation. Not that I necessarily enjoy doing that, but I think that's, you know, having to faced with the idea of making a decision, I find that without being disrespectful, that the credibility of the town of Oakville and how they've approached it and the analysis that they've done on it, I'm going to put more weight on that particular thing. So with respect to that, I am going to put forward a motion that all of these variances be accepted in accordance with the way they were presented, subject to, bear with me, subject to the condition the proposed dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the plans dated August 13, 2018 as submitted, and further subject to the condition that approval will expire 2 years from the date of this decision if a building permit has not been issued for the proposed construction, and in cases where a building permit is not required, that the proposed scope of work has not been fully completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharba. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Yes, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to speak to some of the specifics of this site. It's a very constrained site. It's reasonably large. It has a water feature with regulated area, and the orientation towards the street with that parallelogram design is when you put all of those matters together, it's very, very challenging to be able to place a house and meet normal setback requirements and standards such as residential floor area ratio. So, you know, with that being said, and recognizing and not repeating what my colleague had spoken to with respect to this being a highly technical variance, I will be supporting the motion that's on the floor, and I will speak to the work that's been done by the applicant, working with town staff to try to resolve some of the issues on this and minimize some of the impacts that will be present on the street and on the adjacent neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. I appreciate that. Is there any further discussion? Okay, I see none. All those in support of the recommendations set before us? Okay, your application has been approved. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have minutes? So motion to adjourn, since we don't have any minutes. Mr. Hardcastle, motion to adjourn. Okay, we are adjourned at 9:34. Thank you.